the recording. Right. Today's webinar will focus on stop speaking through the literature and how to engage into critical analytics. Now, with this, we will first of all look at the difference in between just summarizing and reporting versus critical analysis. So what is a critical analysis? We will check on how to read the literature with a problem, but not a solution focus. Most of our webinars touch on that point because it's something that students really struggle to learn, to adopt a problem focus and move away from solution-driven actions. Then we will also look on how to pick on the evidence and data in the literature, but not only on the conclusions, and how to critically reflect and challenge conclusions that are put forward in the literature. So to ultimately allow you to know how to identify and to build on current best practices. Now, for today's webinar, the approach is a bit different than to the other webinars because we will work very much with examples and excerpts from existing theses as well as from unpublished writings. So this shall show you what's best practice, what to pick on, but also to understand that a thesis is the outcome of 4 to 8 years of writing. Now, after 8 years, it can be assumed that your writing skills have matured quite a bit. However, that means you will have very initial writing parts sitting next to very late writing parts. So the initial writing parts will be perhaps more of a summarizing and reporting nature. Meanwhile, the later building parts will be of a critical analytical nature. So one thesis, very different maturity stages that are represented in the thesis. And this cannot be avoided because if you would want to have it up to the standard that you are currently knowing how to write, then you would need to rewrite the entire thesis. By doing so, the newest parts would again be at a much higher maturity stage because you would have learned again. So you need to accept that the thesis is just that good and that you need to let go and accept, okay, there are some descriptive parts, perhaps notably in the literature review section and in the methodology section. So this will be in there. It's nothing to do. And if you want, you are also invited to check this blog post from my colleague Pat Thompson. She provides some useful tips on how to revise your initial writings and how to take it further. Now, at the very start, how can you assess if you are just summarizing or if you are reporting? Now, if writing is easy, quick, generic, lacks evidence and lacks references, then very likely you will be still at a very early writing stage. This is normal because you read the literature actually for different motivations. Initially, you read the literature for you to get an understanding about the scientific field in which you're working, to understand what are landmark studies, what is best practice that others follow. So you need it for making sense of your research. While at a later stage, you read it for very different purposes because you want to critically understand how or not the literature is allowing you to examine your research problem, which means you will look into the literature so to find contrasting views, you will compare those views, and you will go away from working over the definitions and conclusions, but getting more into the details of what studies have been finding out. Now, talking about definitions, I think everyone can do a very easy maturity test of one's own writing by using just the search function in your own literature review or whatever piece of writing you have at hand and check for the word definition. Early writing is characterized by defining how concepts, how theories, how constructs are. And this is basically of importance for you to have an understanding what you're looking at. Do you compare alikes with alikes? Is it something that goes into the same direction or not? So, but as you advance, you might still use definitions, but in an advanced writing, the definitions will occur within your narrative. So if you look at the below, you still use definitions, but you use it to cluster and group things that you think belong together. So it's part of your own writing. But you also will notice that you use the word definition very less than its initial writing. So if you do your own search in your documents and you see you use a lot the word definition in itself still, and it's also setting the narrative, then you know it's earlier writing, which is natural and part of the development process of a doctoral researcher, because it is mainly there for you to make sense of what you're doing. So it's nothing wrong in that. It just shows that you are at an early stage and still in the sense making for yourself. Are there any questions on that? Is that making sense?
Yes, it's making sense. Thank you.
All right. Good. A second maturity test that you can be doing is whether you speak through the messengers or via the messages. Now, in the first example, which is a very simple example that I was putting together, you see messenger A is saying, messenger B is saying, therefore, and the arguments go from there. Now you focus on those messengers, but not on the message as such. So it's a very low level of criticality. You don't know about the details, why A is saying something and B is saying something else. Reason being, you focus on the messenger, but not at the message. Now, the second example below shows a clear focus on the message. You see it already immediately that the messengers are not the active narrative setting. Bar energy, for example, and IPPR are in brackets at the end of each sentence. So they are used within the argument just as a backup and reference where the information comes from. And there's a clear focus in this case on barriers. Now, this is advanced and mature writing. And the word barriers points me to the next slides, because it also clearly shows that the focus is on a problem, but not on a solution. Now, in this example, you see, for example, that the higher level problem focus is a limited capacity for worrying. Now, the entire section or paragraph here is following from that. All is geared and looking at worrying. That can come out clearly if you just see all of those yellow highlighted words. They are all either at the same level of worries, or they are related to worries at a lower level. So it's a clear, focused writing at which you critically look into different concepts and meanings of worrying and how it relates to acting or not acting. So it's focused on problems. It picks on a very detailed level within the literature. It uses different concepts expressed in different literature sources, and it contrasts them. So this is a very advanced stage of writing. Now, in a nutshell, I found this overview that shows the differences in between initial descriptive writing and critical analytical writing. I think that it really easily allows you to spot where you are and where you perhaps still need development and focus. Now, saying need development and focus must be put into contrast with also understanding where are you. Are you still at the initial stage, so you read and consult literature just to get a better understanding, but you're still not writing that much? That's fair enough, but you know for yourself you are there, and at one point you need to move further on. But if you still need to get some more information, do so. Having said that, you might also want to look at another webinar that we were giving earlier on mirroring, because you don't need to start really or spend that much time in the literature review. You perhaps are better advised to look into the problem domain and into the problem field and to try and start uncovering problem domains. This would allow you for a much better targeted consultation of the literature. We're running a webinar exactly on that. You will find the slides at our Doctoral web repository for the webinars. Now, with this, we will look into a number of examples from theses that are publicly available and that you are also welcome to consult therefore, so to understand and train how to spot what is initial writing and what is late writing. Now we use here a coloring code using 3 different colors for distinguishing in between summarizing, reporting, critical analytical writing, and we will use bold and italic to show messenger focus and non-critical writing. This example is an example for just reporting and non-critical writing. It is from a literature review chapter. So very likely this is early writing that is still a leftover and where the author has decided, okay, it can be reused within the context of what I'm discussing, and that is fair enough. So as said, not all parts of the literature review will be critical. Some still will only be initial writings that are setting the context. And for context setting, those parts can still very well be used. Now, this example shows summarizing and non-critical writing elements. So, for example, Gray describes collaboration, so it's again messenger focus also actually. And despite the author being in brackets at the end of the sentence, it's still at the second sentence, it's still not going detailed into the argument nor contrasting. Now, in this example, we have both initial summarizing as well as critical analytical writing, both together in a section. So this, if you read through it, shows you, okay, up till that point, the student had made use of earlier writing, and here he or she started to engage in a critical discourse whereby several different views are compared. Once you see that, and once you, as a student, have trained to spot it, it allows you to much more take out of the literature, because you know exactly which parts you just need to scan through and which parts you might want to spend a bit more of time on. And this is in particular important if you have very old parts and also parts that are geared towards solution, mixed with those parts that have a problem focus, because this is a different maturity and development in your writing. Initially, your writing will be much more geared towards looking at solutions, while at a later stage, you start to really engage in critical analytics that is focusing on comparing different elements of the problem. So if you see in a literature both views coming together and you have the ability to distinguish quickly what is a problem-focused part of writing and what is a solution-focused, that helps you to distinguish in between relevance and non-relevant parts. Are there any questions thus far? We will upload the slides later on, so you will have time to read through them in detail. So for you to also understand, try to understand yourself what is meant in between solution focus and problem focus, because that might not be obvious to all at this point in time. Now, this is an example, and actually an example from Anna's thesis, who is also here in this webinar, from a very late writing, and it shows a high level of contrasting. It brings together evidence with literature parts and picks on the data from within the findings and contrasts them with data from within the literature. So once you hit this level of detail, you might already be working on different parts in your thesis. In this case, it's from the findings and analysis chapter. So at that point in time, you compare your data against something. Obviously, if you have on the one hand your own data, you will not compare it only against conclusions from the literature, because it's not connecting. It's quite obvious if you have two apples in the hand, or if you have a basket and an apple. So the basket being the conclusion can't be compared with the apple being the data. So at a late point, it's quite obvious what is like and like. Now, with this, we move into the second part of the webinar. But first of all, I would want to inquire if there are any questions on the previous slides that you might want me to go back to. Are there any questions? All right. Now, this is a quote that I found quite telling, because research can go wrong, and research often does go wrong. And in particular, it can go wrong if you have a solution focus. You can spend many years working into the wrong direction, because you do not understand that you're actually not looking into a problem, but that you are just speculating and gambling for a solution. And now this example shows it quite well. In a solution-focused research question, you would look for making something better. In this case, how can we make the dorms more hospitable? But why? What is the issue with the current dorms? This would be the research question if it would be problem-focused. Like on the right side, you see a problem-focused research questions. Why are there no air conditionings in dorms A, B, C, and D? So thereby, we immediately know what's the issue. There are no air conditionings. That results in making the dorms less hospitable. Now, the point here is that often the research question is not matching to what we want to achieve, our outcome expectation. And this is a mismatch in itself, and we just were running a webinar on this 2 weeks ago. So be welcome if you want to learn more about this mismatch. So, and if you start out with a problem focus and you derive the research purpose and the research question from there, you inevitably will go wrong, because you will also read the literature with a very different focus. In this left case, you will look just for clues and hints on how to make dorms more hospitable. And those will be the search terms that you will be used in any search engine, making dorms more hospitable. And there will come up a lot of literature that will be looking at that. However, it will lead you zero to understand why perhaps there are no air conditionings installed in dorms, be it price, be it policy, be it whatever. So it's a very different direction that your reading will take. And obviously, if you are just speculating for how can you make things better, you will not hit the data level on why things are not working. So learn how to read the literature with a problem, but not a solution focus, is key. Next to that, practice on how to draw and compare evidence and data, and not only conclusions. Coming back to the earlier example of the apple and the basket, so obviously those are not two alikes that can be compared. So conclusions, to draw on conclusions is easy because they are clear. To compare data sets is not that clear. compare quantitative data sets is relatively easy. Comparing qualitative data sets is very difficult. So if you're doing qualitative research, how do you assure that like and like are at your hands? This is tricky, and you need to start and find that out. And perhaps as a kid, you still know the game of silent post that you were playing in kindergarten or school. Now there's a scientific counterpart to that, which is cited by. If I'm reading student works and they work over a cited by, it's clear they not even took the effort to look into the original study. Thereby, they cannot have worked with data, but they were only working with conclusions or interpretations of the data. So cited by, avoid that by all means. If you don't find an original article, so be it, and don't work with it. Does it make sense?
Yes, thank you.
Okay. Now, if you how to say it? Writing conclusions and working over conclusions is easy, but you also will always read the abstract and the conclusions first of a paper, so to save time. So before you dig into data, this is an obvious starting point. So I don't disencourage to start with abstracts or conclusions. This is just how you quickly can access the quality of the data and of the experiments and of the setup. But afterwards, you also need to go into data. So all things need to be matching and adding up. Again, mirroring within a document is a very good tool to assure that data and conclusion are matching, that you use the same key terms, and that a consistent narrative is in place. Now, if we compare, for example, an evidence-based argument against a conclusion-based argument, this becomes quite obvious. The evidence-based argument is looking for cause-effect relations. It is examining how things belong to each other, what is related to what. So in this case, for example, we look at attrition rates in doctoral programs that are 50 to 70%, which unfortunately is often the case. And then it looks at the reasons for that. So this is a very evidence-based argument. On the right side, we work over conclusion, and again, the conclusions are very much geared toward outcome expectations and solutions. In this case, with relation to disaster risk reduction. So this again is framing the narrative very much different and leads you away from data. So as much as working over solution is not a good approach, it's working over conclusions. So you can check your work, and you perhaps want to check your work if you're working over solutions and conclusions, or whether you're working on a data set level. So this is very different. Are there any further questions on this end? Now, this is an example from the University of Leicester that I found, and it focused on analysis comparing different evidence bases. And I highlighted those. I think if you look for those examples and try to understand how different people are doing and engaging in analytics, this can help you to train your own analytical writing skills. And I said, this will take time, and it will depend on where you are at your research. If you're at an earlier level.
Babik.
Yeah, please. Was there a question? Sorry?
No, sorry.
Okay, so it depends very much on where you are. If you are still at an initial stage and consult the literature for information only, it cannot be expected that your writing is that much critical and analytical, but at a later stage where you manage to establish the problem focus, your writing will become more critical. So, coming to the fourth and final part, understand how to critically reflect on and challenge conclusion put forward in the literature, because science is all about discourse. And there's ongoing progression. So what's today understood as being valid is tested and challenged and might be outdated tomorrow. So this is how science works, and this is how you shall work, and that can be trained. Now, using this example, extract from the University of Cumbria, would you say it's a early writing, it's a good writing, it's late writing? Are there any views? All right, let's look into that. Now, you can see each citation is not really explored or interpreted by the student. The student does not go far enough trying to explain, justify feelings. The student does not question, evaluate the evidence. It's actually, without even reading it, quite obvious that, let me go back, that this is not a critical argument, because it starts with authors, Brown, Smith, Jones, Fee. So if you recall the earlier part one, where we said working messenger or message, this is clearly working over the messengers. And if you work over the messengers, the message cannot clearly be addressed and coming out. So it's quite obvious, even without reading it, just by looking at the structure of the writing, you spot its initial writing, and it will not be critical. And as you can see in this source, that was also the analysis of this piece of writing. Now contrast that to this level of writing. This shows very advanced writing. First of all, it uses numbering consistently, so you can reference and go back to each sentence and clearly discuss where you are. So it allows for a very different level of engagement. But as you see, it's also a journal publication, so it will be expected for this level and for this audience to be at this maturity. So this is a type that you can expect to reach at the end of the thesis, but perhaps not earlier than that, because understand that this means your thesis research is just a training to reach that final stage. So with this, we end this webinar, and we ended today with inviting you to also soon access our free training courses that we provide. And we have one course exactly on critical analysis and drawing on the literature. We hope to publish our free courses in 1 to 2 months, so be welcome and check us out. Now with this, let me stop the recording.